haunting. It was wonderful. And when I heard it, and I hadn't played clarinet for quite a while, but when I heard it, I said to myself, that's not so far beyond me. So that's what I remember thinking at that time. And then years later, 20 years later, I started taking lessons from I.L. Bohr. He's in charge of the education program at Bethel, at Synagogue Bethel. And he also teaches, I found out, actually, I saw a video of him, and he was playing klezmer and, I don't know, and I was really, I really thought, gee, I want to study with him. And so I called him, and we made the arrangements. Well, anyway, it turns out that he was the one who played that piece 20 years ago. He's played it here, he's played it in Israel, and elsewhere. And I have that piece right here. So after 20 years, I can sort of realize what I was thinking, kind of sort of in the clouds, but I can play that piece now. And the name of it is Kaddish, and it doesn't have words to it, but I think it's a lovely piece. I hope you'll enjoy it.
influence, the klezmer influence. Of course, the klezmorim, the klezmer really just means vessel of song, and the klezmorim were the folk musicians in the Russian countryside there who sort of roamed around playing this music, and they had to be able to get on the run fast because the Russian authorities did not appreciate this music, so you didn't see a lot of pianos in klezmer bands because you'd have to carry it on your back and run fast. But the clarinet was a very popular instrument. They would have accordions as well and violins. And ultimately this music, once the pogroms began in Russia in the 1890s, many of those people ended up coming to America, and klezmer really had a great rise in the first 20 years in New York City. And it's really fascinating how that music then links up to the beginnings of American jazz. And there's a whole great story of all that working in New York City. This composer we're going to play, Jacob Weinberg, actually did end up coming over to New York. I mean, he was born in Odessa, and he originally was a piano player who was in the classical tradition. He did grow up Jewish, but not very religious, and he had gone off to the Moscow Conservatory as a young boy, and was there at the same time as Rachmaninoff, actually, was competing with him as a pianist, and thought he'd have a career doing that. But he ultimately went off to Berlin for a little while, and there they had a new society for the preservation of Jewish music, and he began to look into that, and he went actually back and he was one of the founding members of a Moscow branch of this, where they wanted to look into this Jewish music and it was a very oral tradition in the countryside, but they wanted to write this stuff down so it would not get lost amidst all the pogroms. He wrote this after starting the new organization. That's when my interest in all things Jewish began. I became absorbed in Jewish music, and I began to collect and study Jewish folk songs. A new, great, and practically unexplored vista opened up before me. So after that, he actually stays in Russia, in Odessa, until 1921, and then he heads down to Palestine, actually, and is there in the beginning part of the settlement in Israel. And he actually writes one of the first operas in Hebrew called Hey Halutz, or The Pioneers, and ends up spending a few years down there listening to the folk music there as well. And then he comes to the United States in 1926. And as I mentioned, he hangs out in New York, gets to know people like George Gershwin and some of the other jazz musicians. And he starts doing these festivals of klezmer music and organizing lots of these Jewish themes. He wrote a number of pieces on Hebrew themes. So we're going to do here something called the Four Hebraic Pictures in the Klezmer Tradition. This is called Kanzonetta, or Grandmother's Tales, and it has that klezmer feel from the folk songs that he studied. one of the best of the Hungarian clarinetists. I think right now he's principal clarinetist of the Budapest Philharmonic Orchestra and of the Hungarian State Opera Orchestra. Also teaches at the Franz Liszt Academy in Budapest. He's been writing a lot of really interesting music. I've done a lot of his music lately where he's paying homage to different composers. So there's a whole Gershwin-esque type of music he's done. There's another one devoted to Bach. And in this one, he really takes that klezmer tradition again and has an elongated piece where we sort of feel the slow beginnings, the really lamenting part of this Jewish music. It starts to pick up speed over in the middle, and then by the end, we're ready to get up and dance at the chairs. And so if you want to get up and dance, you're free, but leave the chairs on the ground. So this is called Shalom Aleichem, Rav Feidman. Giora Feidman is one of the best klezmer clarinetists alive. I think he's still alive, in Israel. He also was one of the youngest to play in the Israeli Philharmonic, I think. So here's Shalom Aleichem, Rav Feidman. All right, we're going to play a few short last pieces to send you home happy. These are by the great Benny Goodman, who was, of course, Jewish and grew up in a very poor home in Chicago. He was one of, I think, 12 children. His father was a tailor who had come over from Warsaw. His mother had come from Lithuania. They actually met, the parents, in Baltimore, and then they moved to Chicago. And unfortunately, the father could not, of course, find any work at the time in the early 20s there in the 30s. And so he ended up working, this is how Benny described it in his autobiography. Pop worked in the stockyards, shoveling lard in its unrefined state. He had on these boots, and he would come home at the end of the day exhausted, stinking to high heaven. And when he walked in, it made me sick. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand the idea of Pop every day standing in that stuff, shoveling it around. And so he ended up, though, with the kids. He had three older brothers who were musicians. One played the trumpet and then the trombone. Benny got stuck with the clarinet, and he ended up first at a synagogue there, kind of the Kehila Jacob Synagogue in Chicago, and then playing at the Hull House. And they really got quite good. And when Benny was 14 years old, he quit school and went off and began to form a band. Unfortunately, Benny's father ended up getting killed by a streetcar when Benny was only 17. So he never got to see his son rise up and become the king of swing. But ultimately, Benny Goodman began to get this band together. They were playing sort of good jazz, but they always rehearsed a more upbeat kind of thing called swing. And the story goes in the Palomar Ballroom in Los Angeles in 1936, I believe. They were doing a show. In the first half, they sort of went okay, but they felt that they were not getting a great reaction from the audience. And so Gene Krupa, who was the drummer in the band, went up to Benny and he said, "Benny, if we're going to die, we might as well die doing what we want to do." And so they spiced up the second half, made it jazzier, people started dancing to it, and that was really the beginning of this great swing music. And a year later, they played a concert in Carnegie Hall, which has been described as the single most important jazz concert in history. It was jazz's coming out party to the world of respectable music. The concert sold out weeks before. The highest price was $2.75 a seat. That was a good time. And a wonderful quote by Will Freewald, who's a great jazz critic. He said, "In bringing jazz to Carnegie Hall, Benny Goodman was, in effect, smuggling American contraband into the halls of European high culture. And Goodman and his 15 men pulled it off with the audacity and precision of Ocean's 11. The other interesting thing about Benny Goodman is that he integrated his band. He was one of the first to make sure that whites and blacks played together. And when they went down south, if a place would not take him, he wouldn't play there. As he said, "If a guy's got it, let him give it. I'm selling music, not prejudice." And then finally, he was known as a really hard taskmaster to his band, but he also said one time, "After you've done all the work and prepared as much as you can, what the hell, you might as well go out and have a good time." So hopefully Arthur's having a good time, and we'll play a few of his arrangements. What are we doing? I forget what's on the program.
Tin Roof Blues.
Tin Roof Blues, then we'll do Maple Leaf Rag,
and then
King Porter Stump.
King Porter
I'm gonna
Stump.
find out where these are. Let's see. Okay. Thank you.